Hey everyone, my name is Gwen. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about my Q4 2025 book stats. I'm going to be referencing my story graph because I don't do my personal stats right now, but after reviewing these stats from Storygraph, I do want to do my own. So we'll go over the overall stats for the 3 months, which will be October, November, and December of 2025, and then I will go into the months specifically to go over these books. I will say this is not going to be full reviews of these books. The majority of these books I've had reading vlogs with. You can get my full opinions and everything else in those reading vlogs, and I will link them down below in my description if you want to go check them out. But for right now, we're just going to go over stats and if I would just recommend these books or not to you, which I will say, spoiler alert, I'll recommend the majority of the books I read at the end of the year. The reason why I'm doing my stats in quarters is because I don't read enough books per month for me to feel like I should review all of them at the end of the month. So in this way, it means I can have more than 5 books to talk about and have a substantial number to have stats with. So my average reading per month for books does depend, but the majority of the time it is between 4 to 5 books. A lot of that has to do also with the length of the book and obviously if life stuff happens and I unfortunately can't get to reading. So with that being said, here are the stats overall. My shoulder just cracked. So here are the stats for overall for the last 3 months. I read 19 books. That is a total of 7,581 pages. The average time it took me to finish a book is 4 days. I read only fiction. Books that were under 300 pages, 5. Books between 300 to 499 pages, 8. And 500 plus pages was 6. My average rating for these books was 4.16. And my top 3 genres were fantasy, horror, and queer fiction. So really good. Did really well. I feel very accomplished with those stats. Makes me feel very good. I will say I read the majority of the books in 2025 in the last quarter, the last 2 quarters of the year, and I'm so impressed by myself. I doubled the amount that I wanted to read in the year, and I was very close to tripling that amount, so I'll pat myself on the back for that. So now I'll have to reference my story graph per month because I don't remember every single book I read per month, and I don't physically have all of these books, so I'm gonna have to do a lot of editing and pop them in. Okay, so let's start with the October stats. I read 8 books on October, and that was 2,348 pages, with the average time being 4 days to read a book. This was the month where I did Black Aweenathon, even though it wasn't officially happening that year, and I read 7 books for that. So one of the books is an anomaly, and it was because I didn't want to stop reading it for the month of October. I wanted to continue so that I could finish the series in November, and we'll get to that when we do. The first book I finished in October was The House of Always by Jen Lyons. All my opinions on this series are in a concise video, but let me just say, this is not a series I would recommend to everybody, and you should watch that video if you want to figure out if you would be into this series. Book 4 I did enjoy, but book 4 and still the whole series in totality was not hitting the spot for me. Next book was When No One Is Watching. This is by Alyssa Cole. This book was a great start to Black Aweenathon. This is a thriller. It's based in New York, and it's specifically talking about gentrification from the perspective of a Black woman. I'd highly recommend everybody to go read it. The next book I read was Memoirs of a Porcupine. This is a novella. It is honestly the funniest thing that I read that month. I thoroughly enjoyed the porcupine's perspective, and even though it's considered a horror, it's not ghastly and it's not gruesome. So if you're looking for a little novella to read, I'd highly recommend. The next book I read was Necessary Fiction by Elagosa Osunde, and this was a fantastic read. This was my 5-star read. I highly recommend everybody to read this book. This is contemporary fiction, and it is following a queer found family in Nigeria. It reads like you're reading a personal diary entry from each person in this found family, and at the end there is an event to bring them all back together, but it really is more about how the people grow throughout the year and not necessarily the plot, and that's why I absolutely adored this book. The next book is When the Reckoning Comes. This is by Latanya McQueen. I loved this horror story. I didn't love the ending. It wasn't as clean as I wanted it to be, but overall the story was fantastic. You're following a woman who is going to her small town in, I believe it was North Carolina. She's going to a wedding of a friend / acquaintance, and it's on a plantation that has haunting memories for her and for the history there. After that book, I read Listen to Your Sister. November by Nina Vale. This one did not hit for me, unfortunately. In this story, you're following three perspectives. All of them are siblings to one another, and the eldest, the girl, is having nightmares that seem way too real, and by the end of the book, you understand why those traumatic nightmares are happening. A lot of people were excited for this book to come out, and that's why I picked it up, and unfortunately, it just didn't work for me. The one classic I read for this quarter was Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. This one was hard for me to rate because I didn't think it was a bad book. I just felt like I needed to read it in a group setting, and I didn't have that, so I couldn't like talk more and do discussions about it, and that's what I was looking forward to. And that's what I kind of miss reading classics, is when I was in school, it was the perfect opportunity to really dive deep and like figure out the nuances that you may have missed as a contemporary reader. And I will say the edition I had some essays to help with that and gave me more context about Hurston's life in general and her influence. I do think everyone should read this book if you can pick it up and you're looking for a classic to read. Last but not least, in October, I read Ring Shout by P. Djeli Clark. This was fantastic, and I do hope Clark writes more books in this setting. I just loved the characters. I loved how the folklore worked, and I loved that they were successful in the end. So yeah, I really thoroughly enjoyed this, and I think anybody who loves fantasy should also read this book. Even though it's horror-based, you should read this book. Okay, next is November, and the thing in November was I wanted to read fantasy. I was like really done with horror at this point. I was like, oh my god, I've read too many dark things. I need to like go back to my roots. So November was going back to fantasy. I did also read 2 horror books, but I specifically was looking to escape back into my fantasy world. In November, I read 6 books. It was 3,201 pages, and again, my average time to finish these books was 4 days. So I finally finished A Chorus of Dragons this month with The Discord of Gods by Jen Lyons. Again, if you want to hear my whole opinion and review of the series, you can go check out that video I did. The TLDR is I think I wasted my time with this series, and I wish I hadn't. After that, I read Slewfoot by Brom, and this was perfect. Once again, similar to Ring Shout, it is folklore horror based in the United States, but this time it takes place in Connecticut with Protestants. It's a perfect revenge plot. It's a woman who is looked at by a town as being like the worst person, and she gets her revenge, and I loved that for her. Highly recommend that story if you haven't read it yet and it's been on your radar. The highlight for the month for me in November was the Hierarchy series. I read the first and the second book because the second book came out. These are the books The Will of the Many and The Strength of the Few by James Islington, or Islington. I honestly don't know how to say his last name. I loved reading these 2 stories back to back, and if you want to know my full thoughts on it, I did a vlog. Overall, I think the author is trying something very big and different from his last trilogy, but it's in the same theme as his last trilogy, and that's why I can't really talk about it unless I'm talking about spoilers. But I really enjoyed it. It's definitely for people who are okay with following one character as the hero and allowing that character to just kind of bulldoze his way through everything. I will say he wasn't bulldozing in the second book, but I've seen that other people's reviews who haven't liked this series say that the solo character is the thing that bothers them, and the fact that he doesn't really change a lot bothers them. I would argue he does change, but again, I think that's going into spoiler territory, especially with Strength of the Few. Again, if that doesn't seem like your thing, like you can't follow one single character through a huge epic, then I don't think this would be the series for you. Okay, I surprised myself this month by picking up Children of Time by Adrian, I think it's Tchaikovsky. This is a very famous series, sci-fi series specifically, and I've seen so many people enjoy it, and I just didn't know what I was getting into besides the fact that there were spiders involved. So I was like, okay, you don't like spiders, but this story seems very interesting, and I honestly would recommend it as long as you are not terrified of spiders. I think you should read this story. I really loved the dialogue in here, and I really loved the humanity that was flowing through this book. It's really more about how do you communicate with a species that has just been kind of born, and how do you navigate that with trying to save the populace of humanity. It was a great read. It was a fantastic book, so I can't wait to get to the second book very, very soon. The last book I read in November is The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. This book was interesting. This book was on my horror list as well to knock off. I picked it up because I had just gotten the book and I was like, why not? Let's do another horror book. I enjoyed it overall, and I really liked the revenge plot in here. I also really liked how vampirism was showcased in here. However, the chapters that had the majority of the plot and the reason why this revenge was happening were very slow, and the way that I got through those chapters was with the audiobook. So I would highly suggest, if you don't want to read a slow book but you're interested in this one and you want to know if you would like Jones's writing, then I would highly recommend the audiobook over the physical copy. Okay, last but certainly not least, December. My December stats are I read 5 books, and that was 2,032 pages. The average time it took me to finish a book was 4 days. My first book that I read in December was The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. I had higher expectations for, and even though I enjoyed it, I'm still on the fence of whether I'm going to continue this trilogy or not. Originally, I said I was, but I just honestly thought I would enjoy the magic system more, and I really wasn't. Like, I think it's really interesting, but the plot is where I'm kind of like, I don't know if I really care what is happening. What is this sound? What is happening? What are you? Okay, I don't know what's going on inside, but there is some contraption, some construction little doohickey thing that they keep on revving. So if it cuts in while I'm talking, I'm really sorry about it. I was talking about The Bone Shard Daughter and how I was disappointed in it. And at this point, I don't know if I'm going to continue it because I found the magic system to be a little bit lacking for me. Like, I didn't feel like I needed to know more. I feel like I learned everything in the first book, and then I was like, so what now? And then I wasn't really driven by the rest of the plot in the series and what was going on. So at this point, I don't know if I'd recommend it to other people. But for me, right now, it's kind of at a standstill because I don't know if I truly am pulled to finish the story anymore. The next book, however, definitely suggest that everyone should read it. That is the first book in the Between Earth and Sky series by Rebecca Roanhorse, Black Sun. This one, I was surprised how much I loved this. This was a 5-star read for me. I thoroughly enjoyed the plot, the characters, what was happening. It was so good. I don't think I've talked about this book here. I may have talked about it in my 2025 wrap up, so I'll link that down below as well, but I loved it, and I've continued to read the trilogy, and I'm going to be finishing the trilogy this month. So I finished book 2 earlier in January, but I can't wait to see how the finale goes. The next book I read was The Blighted Stars by Megan E. O'Keefe. This was a great read. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed this, and I really can't wait to start book 2. This was a sci-fi read that I thought would be too heavily romantic, but actually I loved the balance of it with the science that we were learning and the politics on top of the romance we also got. I think it was just the perfect blend for me, and I had a ton of fun. The next book was not so fun. Chasing Graves by Ben Galley was not the book for me. I did force myself to finish this because I thought it would get better, and it never did. And though the plot was interesting, which this world focuses on, if you die, your spirit can be enslaved via a coin, and if you're someone who has a lot of coins, you are considered very rich. So that concept was interesting to me, and then the way that it was written was not good, and I really think this author should redo the entire sequence of events and choose better characters, because the characters were just not good people, and I think if every single character you read is just not a good person, it becomes very hard to get through the entire book. But that's just my opinion. The last book I have recorded in Storygraph is Tender is the Flesh. This is by Agustina Bastarrica, and this book was a mindfuck. I put out a review in December about this on my TikTok, and like still to this day, if I think about this story, it is so unnerving. This book really does a perfect job on what it means to not have bodily autonomy anymore, and makes it even that much more disgusting. And yes, I think the thing that everyone goes to or gravitates toward if they haven't read this book is the dystopian cannibalistic plot point. It is so much more than that, and that's not even the scariest part. Like, that's not even the most gruesome part, honestly. It's the bodily autonomy that gets taken away from people. I do think you have to be in a certain headspace to read this book. That was a tough read. Glad I read the book. Wish I had a little bit more of a forewarning on it. Okay, lastly, the other book that I didn't include in my Q4 because I didn't realize I was going to read it until like right at the end, and this is where I got sick, but I did a reread of The Night of Knives by Ian C. Esselmont. I had a good time. I did unfortunately realize how much I felt one character, we got 2 POVs in the book, and one of the characters I felt was just too pushed. I still gave it 4 stars overall in my head because I had a good time, but yeah, that second POV wasn't needed and I think was too rushed into it. So that is it for my Q4 2025 stats and overview of all the books. I overall had a really great time. I only had a couple of books that were duds, and I can't wait to see what 2026 brings. I'm really excited, and in the next Q1 of 2026 update, I'll probably have some new stats and better upkeep with what those stats are, since I'll be personally doing them myself and not referencing Storygraph. Let me know if you do any stat taking for your book reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!